When the Intergalactic Committee for Planetary Classifications convened for its millennial assessment, no one anticipated anything remarkable. Typically, these gatherings were centered around cataloging icy rocks, debating the nuances between semi-habitable and barely habitable planets, and figuring out who would be tasked with handling inevitable squabbles over asteroid naming rights. But on this occasion, something truly out of the ordinary occurred. The esteemed representative, Pranda L. Finn Hush Took, an eight-eyed diplomat with all the charisma of a bland cracker, stood to speak. I've just received confirmation that Earth, a planet located in the outer arm of the Milky Way, has been reclassified as a Class 13 death world, Finn Hush Took announced. The room fell into an immediate and unsettling quiet. To put it into perspective, silence was a rare commodity at these meetings. Usually, the air was filled with murmurs, translations, and the occasional deflationary noises from gaseous species. But at the mention of Earth's new classification, even the notoriously flatulent representatives of the Zebian collective fell silent. Class 13, roared Chorich from the Glazen Quorum, a gelatinous entity resembling a lime-colored mound of agitated jelly. That's absurd. Surely you mean Class 4 or 5 at most. Even a Class 6 would be a stretch. Finn Hush Took's 8 eyes narrowed with intensity. No, the readings are conclusive. Gravity on Earth is near crushing for most species. The air contains a dangerously high concentration of oxygen, practically a volatile oxidizing nightmare. And their weather patterns? They regularly experience catastrophic storms, earthquakes, and massive spiraling columns of air, referred to as tornadoes, which the inhabitants regard as mere inconveniences. Tornadoes, murmured Clemson G., the representative from the aquatic Ricks. Is that one of those made-up stories from their bizarre Hollywood transmissions? No, it's very real, Finn Hush Took replied, his voice darkening. And it's not the worst of it. Earth also hosts life forms that are capable of killing by mere contact. They're plants, insects, marine creatures. Even their water is home to deadly predators. The mention of predatory water caused a small commotion in the room. The Phonon ambassador fainted, emitting a series of panicked whistles that roughly translated to, "Why would anyone choose to live there? They don't just survive there," Finn Hush Took continued, his tone grave. The dominant species, humans, not only survive but actually thrive in this hostile environment. Once again, an eerie silence filled the room, but this time, it was underscored by disbelief and terror. Thrive? How do they survive in such conditions? Came a voice from the back, cautious, as though even asking the question might invoke peril. Finn Hush Took flicked a control, and a series of hollow images flickered to life on the central screen. Humans climbing towering, icy peaks with apparent indifference to gravity, diving into oceans teeming with terrifying creatures, and consuming food so fiery that even fire-based life forms in the room visibly recoiled. And they do all this willingly? Asked Jaw Flap of the Ornith, whose species would never step outside their controlled environments, even if a slight breeze was predicted. Yes, confirmed Finn Hush Took. They call it adventure or vacation. The room erupted into pandemonium. Delegates shouted in disbelief, some fainted, while others frantically attempted to contact their home planets for advice on how to handle this new and unexpected revelation. The Zebian representative, usually a paragon of composure, turned a deep, furious shade of mauve. "This is unacceptable," Chorich bellowed, shaking with indignation. "We must quarantine this planet immediately. If these humans ever manage to leave their world, their reckless behavior could tear the fabric of the galaxy apart." Clemson G., visibly uneasy, whispered, "Quarantine might not even be enough. What if they decide to invite us to one of their infamous barbecues?" The thought alone, the Ricks trembled, imagining their delicate gills subjected to such culinary madness. Before the conversation could devolve into a frenzy of worst-case scenarios, a junior J. Clark entered the room, shaking uncontrollably. Esteemed committee members, there's another issue," the clerk stammered. Finn Hush Took let out a long, exasperated sigh, already tired of the day's proceedings. "What now? The humans?" the clerk faltered. "They don't know they're living on a death world." Once again, the room fell silent, but this time the stillness was not out of shock. It was the kind of dreadful anticipation one feels when the absurdity of existence shifts to a new, even more bewildering level. "They don't know?" Quick asked incredulously. "How can they possibly not know?" "Well," the clerk hesitated, "they seem to think it's normal." "Normal?" Finn Hush Took nearly exploded. "Are you telling me they live on a planet that rains liquid fire, is home to venomous creatures for sport, and occasionally tears itself apart, and they think that's normal?" "Yes," the clerk answered, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "In fact, their literature suggests they believe other planets are far more dangerous. They've even written stories where they heroically colonize barren wastelands because they find them safer." At this revelation, the committee quickly lost what little grip they had on their composure. A collective thought began to circulate in the room. The galaxy was doomed. In just 42 galactic minutes, the news spread across the Union's vast communication network. By then, the phrase, "they don't even know," had become a rallying cry for panicked leaders, nervous scholars, and conspiracy theorists who were convinced that humans were secretly planning galactic domination through nothing more than sheer ignorance. The Department of Xenobiological Risk Assessment, typically an agency whose reports went unnoticed, suddenly found itself at the center of an administrative storm. Its head analyst, Spolin Zach, was called into an emergency meeting with such urgency that he didn't even have time to recalibrate his exoskeleton for the occasion. The meeting began with a holographic presentation. "This is a human," Dr. Zach said, gesturing to an image of a man holding a long stick with fire attached to one end. The man appeared to be grinning, as though he had just uncovered the mysteries of the universe, or perhaps simply perfected a marinade. "They call this activity camping." "What's the stick for?" asked BL, an ambassador whose species reproduced through spores and had little understanding of tools. "It's called a torch," Dr. Zach explained. "Humans use it to create light in the dark, even though they've invented safer technologies for the same purpose. They claim it gives them a sense of authenticity." "Authentic to what?" Ambassador Ville demanded, his once unwavering confidence in their logical superiority now shaken. Dr. Zach ignored the question and clicked to the next slide. This time, it displayed a human swimming next to a shark without any form of protective equipment. "This one is engaged in an activity called free diving," Dr. Zach continued, his voice steady. "They seem to derive pleasure from not breathing while underwater." "Madness," hissed Quick, who had been reluctantly summoned to this secondary meeting after his earlier outbursts. "Pure, unadulterated madness. Why don't they just stay on solid ground?" "Well," Zach replied cautiously, "land isn't exactly a sanctuary either. Take a look at this image." He brought up a photograph showing a human hanging from a thin rope, precariously dangling from the side of a towering cliff. "They climb their own cliffs?" Banff exclaimed in horror. "Is there some kind of predator up there they're trying to escape?" "No," Zach responded with an exasperated sigh. "They do it for fun." "For fun," several voices exclaimed in unison. "And they call us the irrational ones?" muttered Vixel, her antennae drooping in disbelief. The room quickly descended into murmurs, with each ambassador trying to outdo the other in their bewilderment. Some speculated the humans were suicidal, while others thought they were too dim-witted to grasp the concept of their own mortality. But it was the data analyst from the Krellin Empire, a species infamous for its complete lack of humor, who provided the most disturbing observation. "Perhaps their recklessness isn't ignorance," the Krellin suggested flatly, his voice as emotionless as ever. "Perhaps it is deliberate." A heavy silence enveloped the room as the delegates processed this unsettling idea. "Deliberate recklessness?" Banff whispered, his spores visibly twitching in confusion. "But why would they do that?" "To confuse us," the Krellin continued, as though the answer was self-evident. "They make us think they have no sense of self-preservation. But in reality, they are testing their survival limits." "Testing?" Quick sputtered, his gelatinous form trembling with outrage. "They're jumping off cliffs, swimming with apex predators, and lighting sticks on fire just to test something?" "Yes," the Krellin replied without flinching. "They are proving they can survive anything. And worse, they seem to find joy in it." The room erupted into chaos, with some calling for immediate action and others advocating for isolationist policies. One particularly audacious ambassador even suggested the Union should abandon the Milky Way entirely, leaving the humans to their own chaotic devices. Amid the confusion, a message arrived from the Observational Subcommittee for Unusual Behavior. It read, "Dear esteemed members, we regret to inform you that during our recent surveillance of human communication networks, we intercepted a message regarding an event known as Black Friday. Preliminary analysis suggests this involves widespread violence in pursuit of discounted goods. Please advise." The room exploded once again, with many interpreting this as irrefutable evidence that humans posed a galactic threat. But Dr. Zach remained composed, even as doubt flickered across his features. "I believe this Black Friday event may not be as catastrophic as it sounds," he said, though his voice carried uncertainty. "How can you be sure?" demanded Chorich, his form seething with skepticism. "Well," Zach admitted, "I can't be sure. But let's be honest, nothing about humans makes sense. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all." The meeting concluded without a clear resolution. Delegates departed in a murmur of concern, discussing contingency plans and whether they should start building underground shelters. Zach, left alone in the now quiet room, stared at the holographic display of human behavior. A mixture of curiosity and existential dread gnawed at him. One thing was undeniable. undeniable. The galaxy had never encountered anything quite like humans. Despite the mounting panic within the Union, one question remained: what were they to do about humans? Debates raged on about whether to observe humans covertly, make direct contact, or simply cross their many appendages and hope that humans never figured out space travel. Unfortunately, that hope was shattered when the Interstellar Surveillance Nexus intercepted a signal from Earth that indicated humans were already planning to leave their chaotic planet. The signal, analyzed by top xenolinguists, was composed mostly of loud whooshing sounds, dramatic music, and a human voice repeatedly shouting, "To infinity and beyond." While the exact technical details of the plan remained unclear, the message was unmistakable. The humans were preparing to venture into space. This alarming discovery led to the formation of an emergency first contact delegation, tasked with approaching humanity in a controlled and minimally alarming way. The delegation was made up of species chosen for their diplomatic expertise, non-threatening appearances, and resilience to oxygen poisoning. Unfortunately, due to a scheduling error, the actual team consisted of a Glorian diplomat prone to spontaneous combustion when under stress, a Zorian engineer allergic to mammals, and an Ion intern who believed Earth was just a large sandwich. Their arrival, much like most galactic plans involving Earth, did not go according to plan. Meanwhile, Gregorio Greg Silva, a 36-year-old forklift operator from Campes, was spending his evening exactly as he intended, watching a documentary about penguins while consuming an embarrassing amount of instant noodles. Greg's life was characterized by a simple, drama-free approach, avoiding heavy lifting and anything that resembled self-improvement. So when his TV screen began to flicker and display a glowing green orb, his first reaction was neither panic nor curiosity, but irritation. "Stupid cable box," he muttered, jabbing the remote. "Hello, human," the orb said, in a voice that was both booming and slightly nasal, like someone trying to laugh at a high pitch after inhaling helium. Greg blinked. "Oh great, another scam." "We are not a scam," the orb responded, sounding vaguely offended. "We are representatives of the Galactic Union. We come in peace, right?" Greg said, unconvinced. "And I'm the Pope. Look, I'm not buying anything, okay? Try the guy next door. He loves this kind of thing." The orb flickered, clearly recalibrating its approach. "Human, this is not a sales call. We seek to initiate diplomatic relations with your species." Greg squinted at the screen, finally curious enough to engage. "Diplomatic what now?" "Relations," the orb repeated. "We wish to discuss the significance of your species and your place in the cosmos." Greg said, scratching his chin. "So why me? Did I win some kind of contest?" The orb hesitated. "Truthfully, the delegation had chosen you completely by accident. Our advanced targeting system locked onto your apartment due to its proximity to a high-energy microwave that vaguely resembled advanced." Greg cut it off. "You know what? Forget it. You had me at diplomatic relations. This is going to be a weird evening. You were selected for your unique qualifications," the orb finally said, though its tone suggested it was winging it. "Qualifications?" Greg asked, raising an eyebrow. "Buddy, I spent 15 minutes today arguing with a vending machine. I'm not exactly the ambassador type." "Nevertheless," the orb replied, "you have been chosen." "Greg," the orb sighed. "Fine, but if this turns out to be a pyramid scheme, I'm reporting you to whoever handles space scams." The delegation, watching Greg's reaction unfold in real time, was already questioning their entire approach. "Is this typical human behavior?" asked Flurb KNX, the diplomat prone to spontaneous combustion, sweating profusely despite not having sweat glands. "Define normal," replied Ltik, the engineer, who had been battling with the communication orb's malfunctioning settings, which were displaying error messages that roughly translated to, "Why are you even bothering?" The intern, Zib, was more optimistic. "Maybe he's just one of those relaxed types, the kind who stays calm under pressure," Flurb KNX countered. "He's too dim to grasp the seriousness of the situation." Their argument was cut short when Greg's face appeared again on the monitor, holding a bowl of noodles. "Alright, so if we're doing this whole diplomatic thing, can we make it quick? My show's back on in 10 minutes. Flurb KNX began to glow faintly, signaling an impending stress-induced combustion. "Is he eating during first contact?" Oblivious to their outrage, Greg continued. "So what's the deal? Are you guys invading or what? Because if you are, I gotta tell you, we're not exactly organized right now, but we've got nukes, so, think about it." The delegation sat in stunned silence. "I told you," Zib said cheerfully. "He's calm under pressure." Greg Silva had many talents. He could spot a dented can of beans from 5 aisles away. He could microwave leftovers to the exact temperature of molten lava. But perhaps his greatest gift, though he'd never admit it, was his uncanny ability to make absurd situations even more absurd. As he slurped the last of his noodles and leaned back in his chair, Greg glanced at the glowing green orb still floating on his his TV screen. Alright, so you're aliens. Big whoop. What do you want from me? To, like, sign some kind of treaty or something? Not exactly. The orb crackled in response, its voice distorted as Flurb KNX nervously recalibrated the settings from the delegation ship. We require information about your species and planet. Information? Dude, you've got Google for that. Google, the orb asked, sounding confused. Yeah, it's like, well, you'll figure it out. Anyway, why me? Don't you have better people to talk to? Scientists, politicians, or at least someone who owns a tie? We were under the impression. Flurb KNX interjected directly through the orb, trying to maintain professionalism despite his rising frustration, that you represent the average human. Average? Greg smirked. Thanks, buddy. Real boost to my ego. I don't understand, Liltik muttered, staring at the screens that displayed every subtle movement Greg made. If this is the average human, how have they survived a death world? He's entirely too relaxed, Flurb KNX growled, his temperature rising dangerously. He hasn't shown the slightest concern about first contact with an alien species. Perhaps they've been expecting this? Suggested Zib, the optimistic intern. You know, with all the movies about invasions and abductions? Maybe they're desensitized. Flurb KNX gritted his teeth, now glowing a brighter shade of red. He's too foolish to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Just as the argument seemed ready to escalate further, Greg's voice broke in again. Hey, glowing guy, you still there? Or did your Wi-Fi cut out? The team collectively groaned. Greg was getting impatient. Look, Greg sighed, leaning back in his chair. If you're just here for a chat, fine. But if you're planning to blow us up, can we get it over with? I've got work tomorrow, and my boss gets cranky if I'm late. We are not here to destroy you, the orb clarified, its tone carrying a faint edge of regret. We seek to understand how your species has managed to endure on such a hostile planet. Greg raised an eyebrow. Hostile? You mean Earth? Hey, it's not so bad. Sure, the weather's weird, and there's always some guy at the supermarket yelling about lizard people, but it's home. The delegation aboard their ship was stunned. Flurb KNX slammed a tentacle against the console in frustration. Not so bad? This is the planet where liquid fire falls from the sky, and insects can deliver paralytic venom. How does he call that? Not so bad. Greg continued, blissfully unaware of the meltdown taking place aboard the ship. You just gotta roll with the punches, you know? Like when the power goes out because of a hurricane, you light some candles. Or when the neighbor's dog tries to eat your shoe, you buy better shoes. The orb hesitated, its voice strained. Human, do you ever fear for your life? Greg scratched his head thoughtfully. I mean, yeah, sure. Like last week, I ate some gas station sushi, and let me tell you, that was terrifying. The delegation could take no more. The orb fizzled out, cutting off the conversation abruptly, leaving Greg staring at his blank TV screen. Rude, he muttered, tossing the empty noodle cup onto the coffee table. On the delegation ship, Flurb KNX was glowing ominously now, the telltale sign of an impending stress explosion. I cannot work under these conditions. This creature, this Greg, is a liability to the galaxy. Calm down, Liltik said sharply, her patience wearing thin. Detonating yourself isn't going to solve anything. Zib, the optimistic intern, tried to defuse the tension. Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe their indifference is their strength, like a survival mechanism. Flurb KNX glared, or at least made a gesture that might have been a glare if he'd had eyes. You're saying apathy is a survival trait? That makes less sense than the human. Think about it, Zib said, growing more enthusiastic. They live on a death world, but instead of panicking, they just adapt. When disaster strikes, they don't collapse into despair. They shrug and move on. It's bizarre, yes, but it works. There was a long silence as the delegation absorbed this theory. Finally, Liltik sighed. Alright, we'll move forward with this hypothesis. But if they launch a fleet of spacefaring noodle cups in retaliation, it's on you. Back on Earth, Greg's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the unfamiliar notification, frowning. It read, Galactic survey complete. Your feedback is valuable to us. Greg shrugged, deleted the message, and reached for another bowl of noodles. Meanwhile, the Galactic Union Central Council chamber, having witnessed countless crises over the millennia, from star system disputes to rogue black holes, and once even a particularly sticky case of intergalactic parking violations, now found itself in the midst of its most baffling challenge yet. Seated in the chamber, representatives from thousands of species leaned in as the delegation responsible for first contact began their report. Flurb KNX, still faintly glowing from residual combustion stress, took the lead. Esteemed council, he began, his voice quivering. We have completed our initial contact with the humans, and it is my unfortunate duty to report that they are an enigma. A dangerous enigma? Dangerous, asked Jorel of the Rands, a crystalline being whose species had never known fear and was struggling struggling to comprehend all the fuss. They are reckless, Flurb KNX explained, his gelatinous tentacles trembling. Their survival instincts appear to be entirely overridden by something they call vibes. Vibes? Jorl repeated, genuinely perplexed. Yes, Flurb KNX said, shuddering. It's a nonsensical concept that seems to dictate their behavior. They navigate life's endless dangers not with strategy or caution, but with a bizarre mixture of improvisation and overconfidence. A murmur spread through the chamber. Vibes? Improvisation? The mere thought sent shivers, or their species equivalent, through the collective body of delegates. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Greg was completely oblivious to the chaos his existence was causing. After his strange encounter with the glowing orb, he had simply gone about his week as usual, moving heavy things with his forklift and avoiding Karen from accounting. But as he sat in his apartment, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, he noticed something odd. A string of unfamiliar numbers appeared on the screen. Hesitating for only a moment, Greg answered. Hello, this is the Galactic Union Central Council. A robotic voice replied. Please hold for the High Chancellor. Greg frowned. The who now? Before he could hang up, another voice, deep and authoritative, cut in. Greg Sela, you have been summoned as the representative of humanity. Your presence is required to explain your species' continued survival on a Class 13 Deathworld. Greg squinted at the ceiling as if the answer might be there. I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just Greg. I operate forklifts. Sometimes I eat questionable seafood. That's about it. Your credentials have been verified, the voice replied. Prepare for transport. What transport? Greg began, but before he could finish, his living room was enveloped in a blinding flash of light. When Greg materialized in the chamber, wearing a faded t-shirt that read World's Okayest Guy, the entire assembly recoiled in unison. This, Flurb KNX hissed, is the human we spoke to during first contact? Observe his utter lack of decorum. Greg looked around, taking in the spectacle of thousands of alien species staring at him. Whoa, he said, scratching his head. This is, not my living room. Indeed not, boomed the High Chancellor, a towering creature resembling an oversized snail with far too many eye stalks. You stand before the Galactic Union to answer for your kind's existence on a planet of unimaginable horrors. Tell us, human, how do you survive? Greg blinked. What, like on Earth? Yes, the High Chancellor exclaimed. Your world is a death world. Fire rains from the sky. Your seas teem with monsters. Your very air can kill. Yet you persist. How? Greg shrugged. I don't know. We just kind of figure stuff out. Figure stuff out? Flurb KNX echoed incredulously. That's your strategy? Pretty much, Greg said. I mean, sure, there's a lot of crazy stuff. Hurricanes, bears, taxes, but you get used to it. You find a way. Sometimes that way involves duct tape and a lot of swearing, but it works. The room erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over one another. Some argued that humans were clearly suicidal. Others insisted they were indestructible enough. The High Chancellor bellowed, slamming a slimy appendage against the podium. Greg Sela, you must elaborate. Are you saying humans survive through sheer improvisation? Greg thought about it. Yeah, I guess you could say that, but it's more than that. We're kind of stubborn. Like when life throws a bunch of crazy stuff at us, we don't just quit. We adapt. Sometimes badly, but hey, we make it work. The High Chancellor's eye stalks twitched in disbelief. You adapt to a death world? Sure, Greg said casually. And if that doesn't work, we've got coffee. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Coffee? Whispered Jorl. What is coffee? Oh, it's this magical bean juice, Greg explained. Keeps us awake so we can deal with all the nonsense. Honestly, without it, humanity probably would have gone extinct by now. At this, several delegates began furiously typing notes, while others muttered about requesting samples of this coffee for their own species. The High Chancellor, however, remained skeptical. Greg Sela, your explanation is unsettling. If humans are as resourceful as you claim, and as reckless as the delegation reports, then the galaxy may face a serious threat from your kind. Greg tilted his head. Threat? Buddy, we can't even agree on pineapple on pizza. You think we're organized enough to be a threat? The chamber erupted into murmurs once again, but this time there was a faint edge of laughter. Against all odds, Greg's absurd honesty had diffused the tension. The High Chancellor sighed. Very well, Greg Silva. Humanity will not be quarantined for now, but we will be watching. Greg shrugged. Cool. Can I go home now? I left my noodles out and they're probably attracting ants. With a flash, Greg was gone.